Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for sharing the information with your family and with your friends, co-workers. My goal doing this podcast is to bring awareness to some mental health, to help with peak performance, and to really be an advocate for gaining understanding of self, of others, and hopefully these are tools that you can use right away, whatever situation or circumstance you find yourself in. And in this series, we are talking about the topic codependency. And this second video and podcast within this series is focused on potential root causes of codependency. We all know there has to be a beginning to anything and everything that we deal with. So I wanted to kind of highlight some potential root causes of why we become codependent. We're not born codependent. We're not born with these signs and symptoms that I shared in the first video. These are things that become either part of our environment or it's learned behavior. And obviously, we are emotional beings. We are spiritual beings. And when certain things don't line up to either what we expect or we naturally look for, then we deal with stress, and stress, when it's not dealt with in a healthy way, leads us to make decisions that are not the best decisions for us. And so hence we have to deal with some consequences that we either perpetuate or just one mistake, one bad decision could really affect the rest of our lives. And so I want to make sure that we try to navigate what could be some of these root causes for codependency. And if you're like me and you discovered that you are codependent and you want to try to either identify, get over it, stay codependent free, then I think that this series is going to be helpful and beneficial for you. And if you have children or you have family members, co-workers, those that you care about that potentially have signs and symptoms of being codependent, then I would share this information with them so that they can be aware and that they can also try to go back to some potential root causes. Because not that we're going to psychoanalyze, we're not going to go back and remember when we were 8 years old and what happened and so forth and so on, to dig deeper and kind of develop some therapy out of that. Although there's some benefits to that. That's not what the purpose of this podcast is. This podcast is specifically to understand and become aware so that moving forward, it gives us the power that we need and the encouragement to know where it potentially came from so that we can remain free from it. I believe there's power in awareness, and that's the purpose of this specific episode. So if you feel that you need support and you need psychotherapy, obviously we can provide that for you on a one-on-one basis. But the purposes of this episode is to really create awareness so that we can move forward in a healthy way. And also, if you have children that you can potentially see how some of these root causes are being implied or they are being developed in your home, then you really want to you really want to pay close attention to some of these potential root causes. That way, if you are participating in any of that, or your spouse or someone in your family, you want to become aware of that and you want to try to change things so that our children are not affected by potential codependency or any emotional entanglement and all of these other issues that we potentially have to face. So here we go. I want to go down a list of five things that I believe are very common in individuals that deal with codependency. These are 5 things that are potential root causes of why we become codependent. And each one I am going to try to bring a little definition of it and how what it looks like as it relates to codependency. So here's the first thing is invalidation. This one's huge, especially for men. This is a big root cause of potential codependency. Men typically need to feel validated, especially by the male figures in our lives, our father, our coaches, mentors, uncles, grandpas, specifically men, because there's research that suggests that it takes a man to affirm another man or a young man or a boy. There's power in that, someone that they can look up to. And when there is invalidation, and obviously I am specifying men in this particular sentence, but this is obviously for anyone that feels that they were not validated when they were growing up. This is a huge problem. And with homes that are broken at early ages, with homes that are not 2-parent homes or being brought up in dysfunction, this is very common, and unfortunately it becomes the new normal. It becomes acceptable, and it is not okay. It is not healthy. Every child needs validation, and part of that is where the focus is all about not being supported, and the children are not expected to be heard. Children have no voice in many of these homes where invalidation occurs. Children are not allowed to speak, or if they speak, they have to, be a specific way. It's almost like we expect children to be adults. And I remember growing up, there was a lot of invalidation in my life. But one area that I will say was very helpful was I was allowed at 11 years old to have adult conversations with the adult family members in my family. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no stipulations, no rules, no boundaries. Obviously, children should know how to respect their elders, respect knowing their zone, so to speak. But I think there's some health in allowing children in an appropriate way to be part of some adult conversations so that they know that what they say matters and that they will be heard, because chances are 9 times out of 10, a child that is not heard feels invalidated, and so they will project and they will force their voice onto relationships and even parenting where it becomes more abusive in nature. And so this is probably a really big root cause of codependency as we know it today. Children that are not validated, therefore they grow up feeling as if they have no voice, and if they did have a voice, it doesn't matter anyway. So that was number 1. Number 2, swallowing emotions. This is about not having the ability as a child to know that it's okay to emote, that it's okay to feel angry, to feel sad, to feel glad, to feel scared and fearful. And there are 2 very succinct ways that a home can really show this. And one of them is indirect, by a face or a look. If you had that parent, for me it was my mom, where you either said something or expressed something emotionally and she would give you the look like. So that's an indirect way of telling you that what you're expressing is not okay. What you're expressing is not normal or acceptable. Now, obviously, it doesn't apply to every single instance, but this is an example of what it could look like in a home where there's indirect ways of telling us to swallow our emotions. A direct way would be when you perhaps heard one of your parents or someone in your home say to you, "Why are you crying? I'll give you something to cry about. Stop crying. Stop your whining. I'll give you something to cry about or to whine about." So there's the indirect and now there's the direct. And these two, when there are a parent in a home, this does not allow the child to develop a healthy aspect of expressing emotional needs. Therefore, they swallow their emotions and they live a life that is codependent upon approval of the person emoting in unhealthy ways. Or the person does not emote in healthy ways, and so they are codependent on not being expected to show emotion. "Hey, how are you feeling?" "I'm okay. I'm fine. Why? Because there's a fear that if we share how we really truly feel, we will not be accepted or it's not acceptable. And so we're codependent on the fact that the person may not approve of us if we express our emotions. So a third way that we can potentially say this is a root cause of codependency is denying sense of self. And this is where we are taught in many ways that not only our thoughts and our feelings are wrong, but also who they are or who the child is growing up is fundamentally wrong. In other words, there's something wrong with you. This is the message that we hear, that we feel, that we sense growing up, where we get lost in the sense of self of who we really are, because we're constantly told in different ways there's something wrong with us. When we try to engage, when we try to share, when we try to do, when we try to express, and it's shut down, we're told immediately, at least in our perspective as children. Because remember, I'm describing homes where children are growing up and developing, and children are innocent till they're not anymore, right? And so in that process of development, whatever they learn and whatever their environment offers is what will develop them. And so if a child who doesn't understand the rules of life is constantly being told in direct or indirect ways of how much there's something wrong with them, they're going to believe that. And so they're going to have a sense of self that's denied, because they don't want to have to explain themselves all the time, because it's never gonna be good enough anyway. And obviously this development also leads into false beliefs, which I wrote about in a book that came out last year. I can't express enough how a lot of what we do in life is based on what we actually believe. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't really matter. If we believe it, we're going to live our lives. We're going to make decisions. We're going to engage. We're going to get into relationships based on those things that we believe. They're called convictions. They're called core values. I spoke a little bit about it in our first video of this podcast series. We need to get a hold of these potential false beliefs, and we need to replace them with truth, and we need to not give them the credit that they want, because they're not credible. Okay, the next potential root cause of why we become codependent is unrealistic or false expectations. This is where the family expects the child to be able to kind of act like an adult. Like you're asking a 3-year-old to do certain things that a 3-year-old is incapable of doing. Now, they may be able to have an understanding of what you're asking them to do, but at 3 years old, it's very limited. And so the expectation is unrealistic, and they're constantly trying to do what you're asking them to do within their capacity. But if it's unrealistic, they're always going to let you down. And so now they grow up, they develop with this idea, what I do is not good enough. Dad is always angry at me. Mom is always upset at me. Whatever I do is never good enough. And this becomes the stressor that leads the development of this child. And then when this stressor is not dealt with in a healthy way, it becomes trauma. And do you know that where we get the word trauma comes from the Greek? The root is from the Greek, which is wound, the word wound, which is pain. So when we're experiencing trauma based on stressors of life, it's because of the pain that we're still either reliving, feeling, unsettled, never dealt with. And it goes back to some of these root causes, which is when we grew up, we developed. Now, mind you, many of these root causes come from times where we were younger, when we were children, or when we experienced some type of trauma. And I will have to say, not every single interaction or potential root cause is because of people in our lives that actually intended to damage us. I mean, it would be unfair to assume that. Our parents did the best they could. Many of them, if we look back, we look at them and say they were rock stars. I mean, they did amazing with what they had. They did amazing based on some parents that I even get to meet, understanding what they grew up living like. And they did not perpetuate that. They repeated some behavior, but not to the extent where maybe they experienced. And so we have to make sure that we give credit where credit is due. Our parents, for the most part, did the best they could. Some did not do great. Some were absent. Some were not intentional. But it would not be accurate to say that every single root cause is because of a parent or an individual, a guardian, an adult, someone in our lives that intended to make our lives miserable. That would not be fair. But I will say that there were situations, and there are situations, where a lot of the adults that are involved in children's lives are not doing a good job. And so we need to be mindful of these. The more aware we are, the better we can be effective in the people that we are responsible for. And so the last potential root cause for codependency is neglect or abandonment. And just like invalidation, this one is huge. And mind you, again, it's not that parents wanted to neglect us or abandon us. There's different versions and variety in that. There's actual neglect and abandonment. There's perceived neglect, abandonment. There is no other choice. I can tell you of a story of a little girl who at 3 years old was put on a plane and sent to a place where she didn't know anyone, and was being raised temporarily by her grandma and a bunch of strangers. And it was because the mom just did not have the capacity to raise her the way she thought she should raise her. And that little girl turned out to be a woman, a strong woman, who is actually my wife. And she can attest to the fact that if she looks back to that little girl, that was a scared little girl. That was a little girl that didn't understand why she was put in the situation she was put in, but she was. Now, fast forward, she is an amazing woman. She is an amazing mom, and obviously is an amazing wife. But we can't deny that that did something to that little girl. And that is what I'm talking about. Did her mom, who is my mother-in-law, who is the best mother-in-law that anyone could ever have, did she mean to do that in terms of neglect and abandonment? No. We don't rationalize that way. We do what we can. We do the best we can. And that's what she did. And she turned out okay. Everything turned out great. But we can't deny that that could have developed a sense of neglect, a sense of abandonment, which leads to codependency. Because then we have this this notion that this person or people that are in our lives are also always disappointed with us. You know, a parent could be physically present, but still emotionally neglectful or abandoned. You know, there could be a parent in the home living there and emotionally checked out, which is worse than having, in my opinion, than having someone walk out of your life. Because at least when they walk out, you know where they stand. But if they're present and emotionally absent, you don't have an idea. So these are 5 quick potential root causes of what codependency can be, or at least what leads to codependency, I should say. And it's a quick synopsis. I really don't like to make these videos too long because I want to make sure that I keep your attention and that you know that we're getting to some really good information. So these are potential root causes for codependency. And if you can identify with any of these, chances are you may be codependent. Now, I know you may be in denial, and I know that may be hard or something that, that's not me. Hey, if you think that this is a struggle for you, reach out. Let's talk about it. There's ways to identify it. There's ways to really make sure that it's something, it's a thing. And then there's ways out of it where we can be free of it, because when we don't recognize it, it really does damage to our self and relationships that we establish. And sometimes we can be self-sabotaging because we don't realize that we're codependent. Because when we realize we're codependent, it shows the motivation behind the things that we do. And that's where we have to catch ourselves. So stay tuned. We're going to continue with this series. There's more to come. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Let people know that we're talking about this topic. It was big 30, 40 years ago. Now it's even bigger. It's morphed into more specific definition and words that we can identify with. And it's a bigger spectrum than once thought of. So let's really get a hold of this thing and not allow it to continue to get a hold of us. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.